Book Favorites, Your Light in Book Darkness, brought to you by Marnix College and Mr. Jong. That's me. Okay, so today we're going to talk a bit about one of my favorite genres, which is the fantasy genre. And whenever I find myself in a reading slump, when I just can't get myself to read any books, a good fantasy book usually gets me into reading again. So that's why I'm going to talk about three of my favorite books. I've got so many more, but I'm just going to limit myself and talk about these three. What you have to keep in mind, though, for fantasy books is that the genre is so varied, so complex. There are so many different types of stories, so many different types of writing styles. And also, there are so many really, really badly written books in fantasy, especially. I don't know why. That you just really have to avoid. Okay, but there's also some really, really good fantasy, some literary accomplishments that really you shouldn't miss. So books that are really enjoyable. We're going to talk about three very different types of books, different levels as well. So I'll start with the easiest book. Book number one, Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. Here it is. Got the same cover here. Woo. Um, was one of my favorite books when I was about 12, 13 years old. I would always recommend this to young teenagers, and the language is not that difficult, but it is written in a very accessible but beautiful kind of English as well. Diana Wynne Jones has written a lot of books, but I think that Howl's Moving Castle is her most famous book, also because it has been turned into an animated film by Studio Ghibli. It's a really enjoyable film, but really it has nothing to do with the original book. Now, I'm just going to read out the blurb to you. You can see it right there. In the land of Ingery, where 7 league boots and cloaks of invisibility do exist, Sophie Hatter attracts the unwelcome attention of the Witch of the Waste and is put under a curse. Determined to make the best of things, Sophie travels to one place where she might get help, the moving castle which hovers on the hills above Market Chipping. But the castle belongs to the dreaded wizard Howl, whose appetite, they say, is satisfied only by the hearts of young girls. Ooh. Now, I love this book for several reasons. First of all, the main character, Sophie, is just such a great character. She's one of my favorite characters all time. She is witty, she is determined, she is stubborn. She really has this really fleshed out character, and actually has a bit of character growth throughout the story as well. Um, the other main character, so Howl, is this perfectly flamboyant, self-obsessed wizard. Um, really a good match. I love this story because of the plot as well. It has been plotted out really cleverly. So Diana Wynne Jones, she puts all these little hints and little clues into the story that by the end of the story, you think, oh, right. So that was it. So that's how that worked. So it's just a really clever book with lovable characters, written in easy English, but really, I still enjoy reading it. So suitable for all ages, really. Now, the next book that I'd like to recommend is The Name of the Wind. And that's a different beast altogether. Now, The Name of the Wind, written by Patrick Rothfuss. Here you go. It's quite a big book, as you can see, with small letters. But I love this book. It's number one out of a trilogy, although part number three still hasn't been published. Hasn't been for so many years, and nobody knows when it's going to be published. Well, that's one of the major downsides to reading fantasy, is that sometimes authors never seem to finish their series. Looking at you, Game of Thrones. Doesn't really matter because I don't really like Game of Thrones. But The Name of the Wind, part one, part two, really good books, but quintessential fantasy writing. So you've got your dark, mysterious hero who goes on a quest. The story is really traditional in its setup, but it has been written really well. Yeah, I think that out of all the fantasy books that I've read, this one really has best usage of English. Yeah, so good sentences, good words, and as an English teacher, that makes me very happy. Now, what is the book about? I took the blurb from the back of the book. So here you go, this one, because it doesn't give you any other information. So it says, "My name is Kvothe. I have stolen princesses back from sleeping barrow kings. I burned down the town of Traben. I have spent the night with Felurian and left both my sanity and my life. I was expelled from the university at a younger age than most people are allowed in. I tread paths by moonlight that others fear to speak of during day. I have talked to gods, loved women, and written songs that make the minstrels weep. You may have heard of me." Now, when I read the back of the book, I thought, oh, it's going to be one of those books. It's going to be one of those really stereotypical, horrible fantasy books. Seems very self-obsessed. But guys, it is actually a really good book. It's not as pretentious as it looks. I always hate it when fantasy writers throw made-up words at you all the time. But in this book, I actually tolerate it. Yeah, so it's a really nice book. It's a bit more difficult to read than Howl's Moving Castle. Recommend this to year 4, year 5, probably. Nice book. It's on our list as well. I should definitely give it a try. Now, for the last book, The First 15 Lives of Harry August. Now, this book, written by Claire North, I only discovered last year, and it has become one of my favorite books, actually. It's very different to the previous two books, which took place in a completely new world, so like your stereotypical fantasy. This one actually takes place on Earth and has fantastical elements in it. So more like urban fantasy. This book has one of the best and creative premises that I've seen in a long time. Basically, what happens is the main character, every time, I already spoil it. So every time that he dies, he is reborn and he gets to live his life again and again. It's very clever, written very intelligently. The English, higher register vocabulary, so lovely usage of English. Recommend this to year 5, year 6 students. Plot is very good and it's very philosophical as well. It talks about the meaning of existence, about the meaning of time. It talks about morality, what choices should you make or shouldn't you make. I'll read out the blurb. So, some stories cannot be told in just one lifetime. Harry August is on his deathbed. Again, no matter what he does or the decisions that he makes, when death comes, Harry always returns to where he began, a child with all the knowledge of a life he's already lived a dozen times before. Nothing ever changes. Until now. As Harry nears the end of his 11th life, a little girl appears at his bedside. "I nearly missed you, Dr. August," she says. "I needed to send a message." This is the story of what Harry does next, and what he did before, and how he tries to save a past he cannot change, and a future he cannot allow. Guys, really recommend this book. I loved it. Even The Guardian says that it's beautiful and gripping. And some person on BBC Radio 2 says it's a fantastic book. Like, it's fantastic. So read it. Guys, you can't go wrong with any 3 of these books. So I hope that you're actually going to read one of those. Enjoy your reading and see you soon in one of my other videos.